Hey folks, we're here with my Kiyohime sumo style Japanese maple bonsai. As you can see, we are barely heading into the autumn season. We've got a few brown burnt leaves and just a few starting to get some nice golden and reddish colors. I'll be adding onto this video in the next week or two with some additional highlights. Here you can see some of these leaves are starting to get that sun-kissed purple color from those anthocyanins. As you can see, it is just starting to push buds. This is one of the most beautiful parts of springtime. All of these tiny little sets of leaves starting to unfurl. There was a large amount of branches all the way out to here, and I had to reduce it way back. Set us up with some really dense ramification close in on the tree. I'm going to remove the central bud there and allow it to grow up and down. We've continued the progression of working back some of these major wounds, working on these inverse taper issues throughout the tree. So I'm going to allow this to extend for 2, 3, maybe up to 4 internodes on each branch. And then I am going to stop them. Rather than let them run free completely, I'm going to allow them to run partially free. But I'm going to stop that growth to help manage the overall balance of the tree. Maybe slightly overdue, but we're going to come in here today and we're going to control those extensions. We want to do a moderate to high amount of wound healing while also controlling that growth and controlling the distribution of energy across the tree. So this one got really strong. You can see how much larger the leaves are. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to take that tip out right there. See how we pinch that out? Follow along with me on a time lapse as we start pinching some of this back. And I am due to replace this turntable. It's a little bit rusty. But as you can see, we're starting to develop some nice layers, nice shingled pads. At the beginning of June, and the tree has fully hardened off. The leaves are turning into that nice dark hunter green color. So I'm going to move to a time lapse and we're going to fully defoliate this tree. Okay, so here's the tree after reducing most branches back to 1 node. Let's do a full 360. We're going to move it into a shady location for the next 5 to 7 days to allow its branches to acclimate to the higher light conditions. Here's our Kiyohime. It's doing really well after that defoliation. And we're going to just let this thing rock and roll all the way through autumn. After we defoliate it, you'll be able to see even better how much branching we've been able to develop this year. It's quite astonishing. Now looking down here, you can see we still have a very, very chunky root system. That's going to be the major work that we need to get accomplished next spring. We're going to be doing a full repot on this tree. We're going to sort these roots. We're going to do any necessary pruning. And we're going to set this tree up for further progress. I'll see you guys in a few weeks. Welcome back. It's the 29th and we're finally getting some autumn color here on the coast of Virginia. I'm going to go ahead and rotate it around. All right, let's get a look all the way around the tree. We've already lost all the leaves off the front here. Let me give you another view from the top looking down. without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and start the defoliation process. The leaves were already in the process of abscission. I was able to actually pull a lot of them off by hand rather than using scissors. So that was a pretty painless process. Here you can see we have the tree out of leaf. Beautiful, beautiful pile of leaves here. And so that we can get a better comparison from the beginning of the season, I'm going to go ahead and move us inside to the inside studio where we can do a side-by-side under the same lighting conditions. And then we'll go ahead and do our fall cleanup and maintenance work. We're going to do our best here to do some side-by-sides to put the tree from earlier in spring before bud push next to the tree here as we go through and look at the branches, as well as examine some of these wounds so that you can see the progress over the course of the year. So let's start with a quick 360. As you can see, we've got quite a bit of fine branching. We're going to zoom in close and take a look at what we've accomplished over the course of the growing season in the two spurts of growth, the spring growth and the second flush after defoliation. We're also going to take a look at all of these wounds and see how much they've recovered over the course of the year. We're also going to do some fall cleanup on the tree, a little bit of minor pruning, and then discuss the future plan on progressing the design forward in the next growing season. All right, come on in close and take a look. Now that I've got you a little closer, let's go ahead and do another 360 around the tree so that we can really capture all of the growth. As we rotate around here, you're going to notice that toward the top of the tree, we've started to get a little bit of a pom-pom effect with an extreme amount of ramification in these two apical areas. That's a little bit out of balance compared to the branching that we have lower down on the tree, where the branching is maybe half as dense as those two areas. So we're going to definitely need to bring those into balance if we decide to keep those in the final design of the tree. Recently, I visited the National Bonsai and Penjing Museum in Washington, D.C., and I got to take a look at a really nice over 100-year-old Kiyohime that they had there. And so I'm going to pull that up on the side of the screen here. What I want you to take notice of is that we have a very similar issue here on this tree. We've got this extreme area of inverse taper because we have 5 major branches that are coming out of one node area, or at least very close proximity along the length of this trunk line here. So you can see that this is causing a major issue in the design of the tree. You can't outgrow a big structural flaw like that. So in order to balance this tree, we're going to have to make a big decision on our way forward. If you look here at this lower left-hand trunk line that splits into 3, the girth of this trunk line here is so great that there isn't a visual problem supporting 3 sub-trunks coming up out of it. So this side over here is actually fairly well balanced, despite the fact that there's a little bit of inverse taper over here. On this side, we really are going to have to do something drastic to get this back in balance, and we're going to have to do some major carving work. So, although it seems pretty drastic, what I'm proposing is that we completely remove this upper apex for more than one reason. One, of course, is that inverse taper issue there on the trunk line. Second, this joint here, you see this internode here is extremely long. It's over 2 inches, and it's out of proportion for the upper area of the tree. So this is never going to look any nicer than it does now. I'm suggesting that we cut this all the way back and carve out this entire side of this trunk here. So basically everything from the right-hand side of my chopstick would be removed. So we'd be removing this branch here, and then on this side, by completely removing this branch, and then doing some strategic carving work over here, we can bring this trunk line into a better taper. Now, also looking at the overall image of the tree, if we rotate the tree this way, most of the wound of this work can be hidden at the rear of the tree. that's going to cause another issue. Where do we go from there? Well, we've got this other really large branch, and that's going to create an issue as well. It's got that same elongated growth, and it's heading away from the viewer. Generally, your apex should be bowing toward the front of the viewer. So let's take a rounded approach. Let's see, what does this tree look like from the back side? And can we choose a different front for the tree? So from this side, it creates a pretty interesting appearance. Both of these trunk lines come toward the viewer and have that classic bowing forward appearance, but they still have that issue of these really long internodes. Those are never going to go away. So it's something to entertain, but for me, I think probably the best approach would be, again, removing this tallest apex. We would carve out this entire section here. Then this branch we would cut down to here. We'd eliminate all of this up here. We'd leave this small section. It's got a nice change in direction with a slight step down in caliper. And then we're just starting to develop these branches here that can come out that direction. If we rotate around this way, you can see that we may have to do another drastic move on the tree, and that would be eliminating this forward branch. Up here on the top, you can see that we've started to build a smaller branch right here, and we have an additional branch coming out over on this side. So we could keep this first node here, and then we'll have to do some major work to build these two branches into the future front branch, kind of fill in this area here. This one here is really chunky. It's got kind of a slingshot shape between these two branches. And again, that long node there is just really out of proportion with the design. Now you might be thinking, well, there's some longer branches down here that have that same kind of length. But remember, as you go down the tree, you can have these larger nodes, and those are going to be more in proportion on the older, lower branches of the tree. When you get up here into the apex, those just create this really weird impression. If you're looking at this tree and the internode doesn't really bother you at first glance, you may still get this impression at the back of your head, something just seems off. This doesn't really look like a tree in proportion. Dollars to donuts, that's probably because of these large overgrown internodes. So if we were to eliminate this branch here, all of that gone, we'd eliminate this entire upper apex, and then we'd eliminate all of this branch here. We'd really be left with this little guy here as our primary trunk line. Now, you can see we've got some long internodes on both of these sections here. So we would probably keep this for the time being as we continue to thicken this up. This branch to the left and this branch to the right are going to form the basis of our new apex. This might be a little bit scary, but I'm going to take action. I cannot stand the idea of keeping this tree with this huge inverse taper issue and watching it continue to age like that beautiful old tree in the museum. If I can correct it now, I should. I owe it to the owners of this tree in 100 years to correct the issue and give them something more beautiful to work with. We don't want to risk it dying back past the place we cut. So what we want to do is eliminate the problem branches with a long section for dieback in these long internodes. And then in the spring, we can tidy these up. Another important topic, you want to be cleaning all of your tools really carefully before doing any of these major cuts. We don't want to set in any infections into the wood prior to the dormant season. Let's go ahead and remove this first branch. Get a good angle. Boom. And the next branch, hold our breath. Gone. Oof. And our last branch. Now this one, we're going to do all that carving. I want to bring it all the way back below this node. Let's do this in a few cuts. All right, we got that off. Look at that. Boom. There we go, folks. Ooh. I hope I made the right decision, and I think you can agree with me. Even though that was a little bit scary, the future of this tree depended on us making that tough decision. So here we go. These are no longer needed. Let's get these wounds closed. I've got some cut paste here, and I want to make sure we seal those wounds up right away. Make sure we get this cut paste all around the border. We fully seal off that wound. So I'm hoping that you're noticing the same thing that I am, and that after we made these 3 massive cuts, the apex of the tree, although slightly sparse, is in much better comparative density to the rest of the tree. Slightly heavy on the bottom, but we're kind of getting more into that zone of balance. That's really great. I'm happy with that decision. It was a little drastic, and it may take me a little bit of time to get used to it. Now this looks pretty strong over here on the left side, but I promise you we're gonna allow these to grow long and strong in the next season, and we're gonna bring this back into balance. Come on in close. I'm gonna show you my strategy for how we're gonna push these branches forward and start building the taper that we want. This is a really great first branch to look at. Let's take a look at the amount of growth that we've got this year. Right here, this was our spring growth. And then this was our second flush, this really small one. So we actually, if you can see here, there's a little nub where we cut this back. So we had allowed this to extend about 4 nodes, and then we cut it back, and then we had our small second flush, really short internodes. This one's less than 1 centimeter. This one here is maybe only 4 or 5 millimeters in length. Excellent short growth. You'll also notice that down here, we have a little side bud. Now this is characteristic of Kiyohime, which is why when you let it grow wild in the landscape, you get a really dense ball. It tends to have these back buds at the base of the nodes. You'll also notice if you get really, really close, this little gray barky section at the beginning of this internode. Kiyohime tends to throw a really short internode that you almost don't see before pushing its growth. So this original internode here may actually be 2, with a really small one hidden there. That's going to be an area for buds to push sometime in the future. We're going to be able to take advantage of that as we develop this tree. Looking over here on this side, we had pretty good growth over here. We've closed up this wound, and we've started to get some nice movement into that branch, and it's coming up into this space. We've got 2 internodes right here. We're definitely going to cut that one back. This branch over here has a nice interesting shape, and we've allowed some branching to grow from the side, from the top, and then we cut off that side branch. This is great. Do you see that? There's these little buds setting up shop at the base of that. We definitely want to remove those. As you can see at the terminal shoot, you got 1, 2, 3 buds. We're gonna have to select those in the spring. Overall, I like the shape of this branch. It's got a lot of space. It's got some interesting movement. This little branch here may become problematic. It looks like it's going to cross over this. So we're going to throw a little piece of wire on that and get it down and out of the way. And you might be asking, what about your silicone wrapped aluminum? And although I like using that when I can, it can be a little bit problematic in these really tight spaces. So I do need to make sure that I keep a really nice open coil on my wire. I'm adding just enough to gently guide that branch into position. We got a nice open coil. We're not going to scar that, but we've moved the branch where we want it. I also want you to take note of the diameter of these branches. We've got a pretty nice caliper here, and then we have a little bit of a step down, and then here it's definitely a super strong step down to this young branch, and we have another step down here. Well, this is pretty nice. We're starting to get some character and we're developing that taper, but it's quite a bit thinner than this thick branch at the back. And what we want to do is start to thicken these so that we get a better transition of taper here at the base. We're going to need to grow quite a bit more. In the spring, I'm going to strengthen the growth of this tree by allowing 2 escape branches. Most of these buds, I'm only going to allow a few internodes of extension. If you notice on this branch, I left this little guy at the bottom. I didn't prune that away, even though it's a structural flaw. We have our branching here, and then we have this extra shoot here. I'm hoping that that takes off nice and strong in the spring, and I can allow that to extend. As that branch escapes and starts thickening, we're going to start to develop a hierarchy in our branching.
this line here will thicken significantly, and then this branch and this branch will remain subordinate in size. Similarly, this side branch here and this branch will stay small as well. That'll give us the hierarchy in the branch diameter, as well as thickening this overall line relative to the stumpy base of this branch. I've got one additional bonus bud hiding right over here, and I plan to do the same on this branch line here. I'm going to allow that to run and thicken. I may put a little bit of wire on it in the spring as it starts to extend and keep it down and out of the way of our developing pad. Let's rotate around. We've got some really phenomenal branching going here. Let me come down and do a side view so we can take a better look at that wound. All right, this branch is looking phenomenal. Our wound is nearly closed there. I want to put that clay back in the center there. Make sure we have that fully covered through winter. Let's take a look at this wound here. We did some major work on this. Bring this back a little bit. Inverse taper on this particular tree was really horrible when I first got it, so I had to do some major branch reduction. But you know, that's the process. That's what had to be done to get this trunk girth here. When you get a tree really heavily fertilized like that, it's going to cause that extreme knuckling. Not until you slow the tree down, you can start working on that delicate contour. We're taking a lot of tissue off here, but this is going to be necessary if we want to even out this branch. It's okay if there's a little bump. We'll leave that backside. I don't want to disturb the vein on the back of this branch, because this is where all that energy is flowing from. Sculpting these branches in this extreme way, it could end up in failure if the branch dies back, and then really we're not really left in a different position, because the other option was to cut the whole branch off and start growing it from scratch. So I mean, potentially we could get a little bit further along if we had just cut this back last year, obviously not knowing we'd fail. But I'd say it's worth a try to see if we can shape this branch into a usable form rather than assuming failure from the get-go. Oh goodness, that is awesome. Just one tiny little area there where it's still open. Looking at this branch a little higher up, you can see we fully closed that wound there. It's a little bit chunky, so we may do a little more work on it in the spring. This wound is also fully closed. How are we doing down here? Let's take a look. All right, that looks like it is fully closed. Are my eyes deceiving me here? A little bit of clay stuck to it, but phenomenal. That's fully closed. What about this little guy here? That one still has a little bit of healing. Is that closed? It's so hard to tell. What I'm going to do is leave a bit of putty in that. We can just revisit it in spring. Better safe than sorry. And this wound fully closed. That's great. All right, let's take a look back here at this one. Taking that down about as far as I can stand. So if this closes up, we're going to be set. Healing along quite nicely. Let's get all that off of there. Excellent. Nice, low, smooth healing. This wound here, fully closed. Phenomenal. Let's rotate around. Looking here, another closed wound. Here at the center, you can see we've got a really nice healing wound. Really nice callus forming here. Cover that back up with a freshy monster here in the front. Oh yeah, look at that, folks. We are fully closed. This is a nice one. So this gives me hope with those big chops we made a little earlier. We're going to be able to close those wounds, correct that inverse taper. With all these wounds showing, it's probably going to be best that we keep this as the back of the tree. They're going to heal nicely, but just a lot going on back here. But we're going to keep this branch here. We're going to keep just this node here, and we're going to come out this way. This branch, we're going to go here and here, and then develop this branch. So everything, you can kind of see this scar line here. We're going to cut all of this out. Let's rotate. We're going to cut all the way down through here. And we might even remove this branch here. This branch will probably be the lower limit of what we keep. And we'll get that entire section out so that when we come around, you'll see that we're going to be able to remove all of this tissue here. Boom. All that's going to be gone. And that's going to re-establish the correct taper along this trunk line. Now, we do have a little bit of a step down because there's a bulge right here, but it won't be that bad. Because of the angle change, it's going to look a lot more natural, and we'll have it coming out onto this branch that we're going to develop nice and strong. This branch we're going to keep for now, and we may even use it as part of the healing process. We may need to do this reduction in a couple of stages. We'll definitely take that large knob out in a huge section of this the first run. We got a little nub in here. It's healed over. Doesn't look too bad, but you can see it kind of bumps up. So now that we've established this branch, we're going to let this one run a little bit in the spring. We'll be able to carve that down a lot closer and cleaner now that we've established this nice lifeline going through here. This branch over here you can see is extending really nicely. On the topic of taper, you may also notice that in a nice thick primary branch, it steps down right here and then it splits. And you can see these really long sections of branch with no step down. Our future branch, so there's those two really small branches there. These are going to be the branch. These larger sections we're growing out to thicken. As these smaller branches develop, we'll be able to cut these back and step down the taper. So with that in mind, we're going to need to wire this branch a bit lower to make room for the future branches that are on the tops. See if we can hook that under there. Boom. Just like that, we pulled it down. See how this branch is coming right out over there into that space. These branches that are heading to the interior, we're going to go ahead and just take those off. Let's go at a high angle so you can see what I'm doing here. So we've got this branch redirected forward into its own space. As you can see, these branches here are a little bit crowded, and we're going to want to give a little bit of a spread to that branch. Again, we're keeping that nice open coil. We're going to gently direct this branch out into its own space. Gently going to drop that down. As you can see, we've got a nice open space, plenty of room for this branch. All right, this other branch line is looking great. We've got upper branch and a lower branch. What I like to do is spread these slightly into their own space. And the beauty of working on this wiring process in the winter is the tree is not thickening anymore. So we don't have to worry so much about all of the bite-in that can cause those nasty scars on our Japanese maples. All right, we've got a nice open coil. Gently spread that branch over into that space. This branch will do the same. Slightly spread it out. It's in its own plane, its own height. This right-hand branch will be subordinate to this left-hand branch in caliper. We're going to grow out this tip right here as much as possible next year before cutting back to this branch. Thickening this entire branch line will create a clear hierarchy, with this branch being a little bit thinner, this one also being slightly thinner. Really good job of starting to develop this little branch area here. You can see this really dense area of branching. This lower branch will eventually be able to cut back to keep that back in the silhouette. We're going to allow these to run fairly strong in the spring and see how these develop. A little bit higher, here is our branch that we're going to be working on, and you can see that we've got 3 nodes going here. This central one is fairly long. This one's fairly long also. For now, I'm going to leave these. We're probably going to allow these to run in the spring, and then we'll cut back. There's also this strange downward growing bud. We don't want that in there. Let's eliminate that. Got a little bit of congestion in here, so we're going to eliminate some of those buds that are forming. Got a nice little future apex going here. And this branch, we don't need it any stronger, so I'm going to cut it back to these 2 lateral buds. And let's spin around. This branch is doing well. We got a dead tip there. We've already got that. taking a look from the top, you can see we've got this nice branch here, and we're starting to develop this really weak little branch there. I want to make sure that this branch has enough space to grow into its own, so we need to direct this branch much further over to the right hand side. All right, let's see if we can get this to move a little bit. We're just going to do a little clamp. Bring that branch over into place. And we will remove that in the spring, and it'll snap back a little bit. In the meantime, we can get this branch right into the space. We'll use that same technique. I'm just going to create a little hook, and we'll use that to pull this branch out here into the open space. Just like that. These branches are really long and obnoxious, but for now we're going to leave them. We may need these to start thickening up these lower branches. Let's take a look way back down at the bottom and address these first lowest branches down here. All right, here we are on the lowest branch section, and we have these two nice prominent primary branches coming off of this left side of the tree. We took a look at this wound already, and then we have these nice branches coming out over on this side here. We'll take a look at those from a lower angle in a minute. I wanted you to look from the top view so you could see the development of this branch here. And as you can see, it's coming along quite nicely. We have a really prominent line here, so we need to start thickening up this branch line here. As you can see, this is a drastic step down to this taper here. It's quite skinny compared to the thickness of this branch, so we're going to need to thicken this up quite a bit. Our best way forward is probably going to be to continue thickening this internode here. It's already quite long. Some might say it's too long for the size and scale of this branch, but we're going to continue working with what we've got. We've got this extension right here at the very tip. This is the branch we're going to exploit to thicken the overall branch. We're going to let this run all spring long and see how thick we can get this branch. You can also see that there's some back budding, and that's going to cause issues of inverse taper if we don't remove those. If we look at the branch to the left, you can see this is quite a bit thicker than this one. So this has a nice step down. It's already in fairly good proportion, but we still need to do a lot of work with this branch and this branch. So we're going to need to let an extension run on the terminal shoot of both of these. This branch line comes along through here. And as you can see, this is fairly straight all along this section. So what I intend to do is allow this entire branch to run, and then maybe next season or next fall, we'll cut this entire branch off after we get the caliper that we want. This one, we're going to continue to keep pinched back. Let's get rid of those extra buds there. This branch over here, let's get rid of that extra bud on the side, scrape those off. And then we should also pinch this back. You can see this has an extra internode on the end. Let's get rid of that. We'll probably let this lower branch here run. Get rid of those extra buds. All right, we're in business. I really like the overall shape of this branch. They're pointed in the right direction. We're going to allow a few extensions to thicken up those branch lines, but all of these more refined tips, we're going to pinch those in spring and only allow them to grow one internode. All right, taking a look at this branch to the rear left of the tree, you can see we have some really strong prominent internodes. This is going to be probably way too long for the final design of the tree. The same is true for this one over here, but I'm not quite ready to let these go. I think we can develop some really nice branching between this shoot and this little shoot here that we can further develop. This one we're going to hang on to, and we're going to allow that to run so that we can again start developing that thickness in this branch line further back. With that in mind, I'm going to wire this branch a little bit over here to the right. It's going to sit over in this spot. This is going to run long and strong, and then eventually we'll cut this back. We don't really need to worry about this overshadowing this branch. We're going to let it grow nice and long. It'll get plenty of sun. All right, as you can see, we're using that nice open coil technique. Nothing too drastic. We're going to gently bend that branch back over here into that space. We're going to want to move that over into the space as well. We're going to eventually sacrifice this entire branch. In fact, I'm going to remove that now, get it out of the way. And then we're going to use their little trick here to bend that branch right over here into this space. It's a little bit ugly, but all we're trying to do is get the work done. I don't want this branch to interfere with this little branch. This is going to be our runner. Taking a step back and looking over the tree, we've got a few other areas where we need to eliminate these excess buds. Open that up a little bit.
All right, let's rotate around and get one more look at the tree. Hopefully this has been a good year of experience for you viewers out there. Thanks for joining me. And I hope that in your developing trees, you have the courage to make those bold decisions and make those hard chops when you need to. I'm looking forward to seeing this tree again in the spring and doing some more work on that large area of inverse taper. We definitely don't want it to look like that poor tree at the Arboretum after 100 more years. So we're going to get the structure right, and we're going to continue pushing this tree into a better state of refinement. So thanks again for joining me on Acer Bonsai. Hop into those comments. Let me know what you think. Did I make a mistake? Did I do it right? I'd love to hear what you think of my work today, and let me know what's going on in your Japanese maple garden. Until next time, hope you all have a great winter, a great dormant season. Happy holidays and Merry Christmas.